0. In the stillness of the night, with almost no visibility and only the runway lights piercing the darkness, Flight 8250 of Aero Caribbean Express, AES, made its approach to San Andres Island. 004. After a 4-hour delay and battling rough weather en route, the crew believed they were just one landing away from wrapping up a long and tiring day. 10. But lurking in the shadows was a hidden danger, one the pilots couldn't see. 013. Convinced they were safely aligned with their intended glide path, they began a descent that was unknowingly too low. 018. They had fallen into the trap of the notorious black hole illusion. 021. A deceptive optical phenomenon where complete darkness misleads even the most seasoned pilots. 025. Coupled with poor weather and limited cues, the illusion created the false perception that they were on the correct path, 030, when in reality, they were seconds from disaster. 034. Will the pilots be able to land the aircraft safely? 037. Or is tragedy waiting in the final moments? 040. This is the story of AES Flight 8250. Background, 045. In the early hours of August 16, 2010, AES Flight 8250, a Boeing 737-700, registered HK4682, was scheduled for a domestic passenger flight from Bogotá to San Andres Island, Colombia. 052. The original departure time had been set for 9:29 p.m. on August 15th. However, multiple delays pushed the takeoff further, first to 10:50 p.m. and then again to 11:45 p.m. 101. After a long wait, 125 passengers, a mix of tourists and locals, boarded the aircraft. 106. Among them were Colombian nationals as well as travelers from the United States, France, Brazil, Costa Rica, and Germany. 113. The crew consisted of 2 pilots and 4 cabin crew members. 116. At the controls was Captain Wilson Gutierrez, a seasoned pilot with over 7,600 flight hours, mostly on turboprops. He had recently transitioned to flying the Boeing 737 and was serving as the pilot flying on this leg. 125. His co-pilot, First Officer Camilo Galvan, had logged approximately 1,900 flight hours and was acting as the pilot monitoring for this journey. Music 132. At 11:25 p.m., the flight crew contacted El Dorado Ground Control, confirming the latest estimated departure time. 137. Once cleared for the flight to San Andres, the crew started the engines and called back to request taxi clearance to runway 31R. 143. Soon after, the aircraft was pushed back from the gate and began taxiing to the runway, waiting for final takeoff clearance. 148. At exactly 12:07 a.m. Now more than 3 hours behind schedule, Flight 8250 finally lifted off from El Dorado International Airport, marking the start of a new day. 156. The aircraft climbed smoothly to its cruising altitude, and the busy early stages of the flight were uneventful. 2V communication between the pilots and air traffic control remained steady as they crossed through various sectors without any issues. Both 6, inside the cabin, the mood reflected a typical night flight. Some passengers tried to get some rest, while others quietly chatted or relaxed. 212. The journey from Bogotá to San Andres was underway. The flight from Bogotá to San Andres typically takes about 1 hour and 40 minutes, crossing over the Andes Mountains, the Colombian Plains, and finally, the Caribbean Sea. The final approach involves a descent over water towards San Andres Island. With passengers settling in, let's briefly talk about today's sponsor. BetterHelp, an online therapy platform that lets you connect with licensed therapists from the comfort of your home. With over 30,000 professionals, you can find the right match for your needs. Sessions can be done through phone, video, or messaging. If needed, switching therapists is simple and free of charge. Your mental health matters, and BetterHelp makes support accessible and affordable. They're rated 4.5 stars on Trustpilot. To get started, visit betterhelp.com/investigation or select Air Crash Investigation at sign up for a special discount on your first month. Now, back to the investigation. At 1:00 a.m., about 45 minutes before landing, the captain briefed the first officer on the approach. They discussed weather conditions, the route, navigation aids, altitude levels, and any potential challenges. Following the briefing, they programmed the Jigar 3A arrival and V Zulu approach for runway 06 at San Andres Airport into the flight management system. San Andres Airport has a single runway, 2,380 meters long and 36 meters wide. Approaching, this runway at night is tricky due to the lack of visual contrast between sea and land. Only the runway lights provide guidance. The approach used the VOR DME navigation system, which helps determine position and distance for proper altitude control during descent. As the weather deteriorated, Captain Gutierrez requested an 8 to 10 mile rightward deviation to avoid the worst of the storm. For the next 20 minutes, the flight remained stable. At 1:25 a.m., they requested descent. Panama Control initially cleared them to 20,000 feet, then revised it to 24,000 feet due to surrounding weather concerns. The captain asked for an updated weather report. Tower reported runway 06 in use with calm winds, visibility over 10 kilometers, broken clouds at 1,500 feet, a temperature of 30 degrees 6, and storm activity nearby but no rain. As they got closer, just 48 miles out, Panama Control cleared them for a lower descent and handed them over to San Andres approach. Weather conditions worsened, turbulence increased, and passengers grew uneasy. Cabin crew worked to keep everyone calm. The flight crew informed passengers that the weather would soon improve. Meanwhile, they requested direct routing to the Jigar waypoint and were cleared to descend to 3,000 feet for the V Zulu approach to runway 06. This approach begins at Jigar, 12 nautical miles from the VOR DME station, descending on a 2% gradient to the final approach fix at 1,600 feet. Landing, gear down, flaps set, and speed stabilized. Descent then continues to 630 feet above sea level. If the runway isn't in sight by the missed approach point, 9 nautical miles out, the pilots must initiate a go-around. This structured approach ensures safety in challenging conditions. At 1:40 a.m., just minutes from touchdown, the first officer lowered the landing gear, adjusted the flaps, and reactivated auto throttle. The crew received clearance to land on runway 06. However, the weather continued to worsen. Heavy rain, 10-knot winds, and visibility reduced to 5 kilometers, then to 4 kilometers, with the runway wet and wind from 040 degrees at 8 knots. Upon visual contact, the captain disengaged the autopilot and took manual control. But due to poor visibility and minimal visual cues, they misjudged their height, believing they were higher than they actually were. This classic black hole illusion occurs during night approaches over dark terrain, where the lack of contrast between the runway lights and surroundings creates spatial disorientation. Further compounding the issue, the captain, recently transitioned from turboprops to jets, applied a landing method better suited for turboprops, aiming for the very start of the runway, which is risky in jets, especially in poor weather. This, coupled with their already low altitude, left no margin for error. At 500 feet, the Ground Proximity Warning System, GPWS, alerted the crew. The captain acknowledged. 500, checked. All set for landing. Clearance confirmed. In case of wind shear, toga, max thrust, maintain current flaps and gear. The aircraft then descended into worsening turbulence and poor visibility. The captain requested intermittent wipers. Despite multiple GPWS warnings, no effective action was taken. At 1:47 a.m., the aircraft impacted the ground just 49 meters short of the runway. It skidded over 500 feet, breaking into 3 sections. One engine tore off and the landing gear collapsed. The impact flung passengers and crew violently through the cabin. Miraculously, most passengers survived. A flight attendant quickly opened a door, enabling evacuation. Emergency teams arrived swiftly, extinguished a small fire, and treated the injured. Despite the devastation, only 2 fatalities occurred. The investigation by Colombian aviation authorities identified several key factors. Severe weather, with rain and thunderstorms, created demanding approach conditions. Flight data showed the aircraft flew 5,300 feet below the intended glide path. The crew misjudged altitude due to the black hole illusion, worsened by poor weather. The captain's turboprop habits were unsuitable for jet landing procedures. Most critically, the crew failed to respond to repeated terrain warnings. The report concluded that while the crew had sufficient experience, additional training in non-precision approaches, adverse weather, and better use of aircraft systems was needed. Recommendations included enhanced simulator training for difficult approaches, updated SOPs, focused training on situational awareness and decision-making. During landings. In response, both IRZ and Colombian aviation authorities implemented these safety changes, aiming to prevent future tragedies.